Hi, this is Lana from San Francisco Historical Society. Welcome to this week's online history presentation. We have Lorri Ungaretti with us, who's here to talk about a fabulous shopping experience and extravaganza called the Crystal Palace Market. I'm going to allow Lorri to share her screen and take it from here. Welcome, Lorri.
Thank you. Now I know you don't want to be shared with my Zoom, so okay. Crystal Palace Market is really pretty fascinating because it is a phenomenon really that happened in the 20th century, early part of the 20th century. It started, and I'm a native, and I never heard about it until a few years ago. And so when I started researching it, I found out that it was a really fascinating place, and there were a lot of fascinating people who were involved in it. So I want to share that with you. First I want to tell you that almost all the photos are from the San Francisco History Center, the San Francisco Public Library. They have really most of the photographs that were ever taken of Crystal Palace Market. So if you want to see them, go online and take a look at them. This is the spot where it was built. It was at Market and 8th Street, and it was about maybe a third of a block. And it was originally owned by Andrew McCreary. Andrew McCreary was born in Ireland, and he came here during the gold rush. And he did make a lot of money, but he wasn't a miner. He was a salesman. He sold products. And with the money that he made, he started investing in property in San Francisco. And this is part of the property that he invested in. And not very much happened to it for quite a while. I think he probably got hold of it around 1860. In 1874, though, the Mechanics Institute built a pavilion there. What the Mechanics Institute used to do was that every year they would have pavilions for annual they would have annual exhibitions every year, and they were industrial fairs that displayed inventions, art, and products of all kinds. And they leased this land for 6 years from Mr. McCreary, and they had their 9th exhibition in this spot on the McCreary land at Market and 8th. And that is an interior view of the exposition that year. Then the land became known for sporting events. The old wreck at 25th and Folsom, that playground had been used for many years and was no longer being used before 1883. Because in 1883, something called Central Park opened at 8th and Market. And there were a lot of amateur and professional baseball teams that played in Central Park. This, just so that you know where we are, this is 8th Street. This is Mission back here. And the storefronts are all along Market Street. So again, this is the McCreary land at 8th and Market. In the late 1880s, they built a ballpark called Haight Street Grounds, obviously on Haight Street or near Haight Street. And most of the sporting events moved away from Central Park. But I should tell you that in 1895 and 96, Stanford and Cal played 2 football games here, and they were part of the series that later became known as the Big Game, but it wasn't called the Big Game then. In 1895, it was a tie, and in 1896, Stanford won. One of the things, Andrew McCreary was really known for not only owning this land, but for being a good citizen of San Francisco. And in 1903, he donated $45,000 for a branch library to be built at 16th Street near Market. And it was actually called the McCreary Library. And you may know some people alive who still remember the McCreary Library, because although it opened in 1904, it was severely damaged in the 1957 earthquake in Daly City that most people don't think much about, but this was a very old building at that time, and it was damaged so badly that at that time they built a new library there, and it's now the Eureka Valley branch, also Harvey Milk Memorial branch. So the McCreary's estate, Andrew McCreary died at the age of 83 in 1913. And from 1906 to about 1921, the land really wasn't used very much. In 1906, Central Park was completely destroyed, and the various stores that were around it were destroyed in the fire after the earthquake. And so between about 1906 and 1921, the land became used for a lot of different things, but mostly it was called the circus grounds, because whenever a circus came to the city, they would have a parade that would take them to 8th and Market, and they would have their events and their shows right on the McCreary land. And let's see, here are some of the various things that went on. There were quite a few things. There was wrestling, cricket, and rugby. You can see one of these is rugby, bicycle races, auctions, fundraisers. Also, there were a couple things with interesting names. T.S. Baldwin's Daring Parachute Jump, the Monster Man-Eater, the largest shark ever caught on the coast of California, Miss Lillian F. Smith, champion rifle shot of the world, and a ladies' football game. But most of the time, there were circuses. And the Sells Floto actually, and this ad doesn't show it, but in 1914 to 1915, the Wild West show with Buffalo Bill was part of Sells Floto, and that came here too. And it was one of the things that was presented on the what used to be Central Park. In 1921, the land was still owned by the McCreary estate, and they were thinking about what they were going to do next, and they were thinking about themselves starting a large market, but that never happened. This is the land that later, right here, actually all the way to the corner, this is 8th Street, and this is where they built the Crystal Palace Market. And one thing to realize is that at this time, 1922, the picture's in 1921, but in 1921, 22, this was considered the outskirts of the city. It was really kind of considered far away from downtown. It's kind of interesting that it was also called Upper Market. And these days, Upper Market is west of Castro Street. And this would be called Central Market. But at that time, so little was going on this far out on Market Street that they called it they called it Upper Market. And as you can see kind of along the way, it's kind of hard to see here, but later we will see that there are a lot of movie theaters that have opened and there's a lot more traffic. But in 1922, there wasn't very much, except that there had been a survey that was done by the Examiner, and it found that 9.5 million people per day walked past 8th and Market. So that was good enough inspiration for a builder to do something with this land. And that builder was Arthur Rousseau, who's known later for some other things, and I'll tell you about that when we get to it. But he bought the land there for $700,000 in 1922. At the time, he and his brother Oliver owned Marion Realty Company, but Oliver wasn't involved in this. This is really Arthur who bought it. So let's see. So here we are back at that map that you saw at the beginning. We've got Market Street here and 8th Street. And this is where they built, actually the entire outlined area, outlined thickly. that was the land that was bought. So the Crystal Palace Market, which was at 1175 Market Street, the entrance was right about here. And you went in and you went into this huge place. And this is the main entrance that was on Market Street at 1175. And this is the way it looked across the street from Market. And they got a blade up right away, advertising themselves. And let's see what else. The building of it is a little bit interesting also historically, is that the building is made from steel, concrete, and glass. And the steel came from a ship that was used in the Spanish-American War. The steel actually came from this ship that they had decommissioned, and the steel was just not used at all. It was just junk. And there was one quote that came out at that time that said, "The Crystal Palace Market enjoys the distinction of having been built in part from a battleship, the steel framework having been made in San Francisco from plates from the cruiser Marblehead." Now, the purpose of the Crystal Palace Market was to sell high quality produce, not produce, but food. That was the original purpose of it. High quality food at low prices. And there were ads encouraging vendors to join the group. To get some idea of the size of this, the land of Crystal Palace Market was over 70,000 square feet. And there were over 75 vendors. And they did a lot of advertising, and this is before they opened. They had a list of they had a list of the concessions that were already closed, that were already taken care of. They had a soda fountain, and they sold cereals and shoes and bacon, and then they had a list of things that were open that people could still rent space. And this ad kind of is to make people feel that they were really out of it if they didn't do it. So here is a drawing of the finished building. This is 1175 Market. People went in here, and then it went, and this is a skylight that helped with the lighting, and here too. And then it went over here, and there was parking, a lot of parking over here, which you can't really see, and some parking here. And that was really forward thinking, because people were just beginning to buy cars in large numbers, and there was a place for them to park. They didn't have to drag all their groceries on the public transportation. So one of the things that, when I talked about the size of it, it also relates to how quickly it was done. As I said, it was over 70,000 feet, 71,000 square feet. And there were about 75 vendors. The Arthur Rousseau bought it in March of 1922. Construction began in May of 1922, and it opened in mid-December 1922. Now, anyone who does any work in the city now knows there's no way that anything like this size or even smaller could be built in that period of time, but it was done then. And here's some of the kinds of here's what it looked like inside in one part of it. And you can see in the background, there's a beauty shop. There's here's the soda fountain, which we will see later. It didn't make it, actually. And some things were produce, some things aluminum, and housewares. We'll see a close-up of that later. And then there were just all kinds of booths with all kinds of people selling different things. There were these bulk foods. They made pizza there. There was produce. Here's cookies and candy, and a delicatessen in the background. But in the foreground is another produce stand. There were a lot of those. This is one of several meat markets. And here are there's a woman packaging eggs, and they had at the 6-month anniversary, the Crystal Palace Market reported that it had had 6 million customers. The Chronicle reported that 159,000 of those customers carried away 1,273 pounds of sugar in 8-pound packages, 883,000 pounds of beef, 325 pounds of lamb, 325,000 pounds, sorry, 987,000 pounds, dozens of eggs, like what that woman was selling. And I'm going away from, there she is. 135,000 pounds of candy, 250 carloads of potatoes. There was also someone who tried to give people a picture of what the market was like. And that person wrote, a greater variety of nuts than were ever collected in one place. Cashews from South America, horn nuts from China, pecans from Texas, peanuts from Alabama. You could buy Christmas cards, duck eggs, old coins, incense, health drinks, manicures. You can get a hair permanent. You can have your hat blocked, your shoes soled, your knives sharpened, and more. One of the more was, there was a man I talked to who was a young boy at the time, and he said that you couldn't get soft ice cream anyplace. It wasn't as popular as it is today, but you could get soft ice cream at Crystal Palace Market. So he would go, and that's all he remembers about it, is that he would get it. Okay, so we'll have some more photos. Here's some cheese stands. And this is alcohol. And then they decorated for Christmas. They decorated the roof, and then the individual vendors, some of them did decorations. What is interesting of the one on the right is this is actually, I can't really see what they're selling, but it's a health food stand. And I don't really think of 1920 to 1930s as having a health food stand anywhere, but that's what this had. That was one of the many things it had. Here's more Christmas with individual decorations. This is the crowd, one of the crowds of people, and everyone I talked to, there weren't very many people who are still alive who can remember it, but most people talked about how crowded it was, that it was always busy. And I didn't tell the years that it ran. It actually opened in 1922 and ran until 1959. So it was there for quite a while. It was across the street from the Civic Center. This is a really good, oops, I'm sorry, I forgot. This is people that were waiting in line to buy the New Zealand beef from one of the meat markets. They're waiting in line, and this is them buying the beef, the New Zealand beef. And this is the picture I was starting to talk about. You can get an idea of where Crystal Palace Market was. This was taken from the market, probably from the roof, I would guess. And it was right across from Civic Center. It opened in 1922, and I told you that it was bought by Arthur Rousseau. He only kept it for 2.5 years, and then he sold it to, of all people, the Emporium department store. And at that time, he sold the market itself and then the buildings that the Rousseaus had built. And this is the Marion building. So Marion Realty Company was in there for a while. And these are the Clarion buildings, because Clarion clothing store was in there for a very short time, but for some reason the name stuck. It was always called the Clarion buildings. And wait a minute, Arthur Rousseau left Crystal Palace Market to start working with his brother Oliver in the Sunset District to build some storybook houses that were very popular and still are today. They have this look of the turrets and different things like castles, that it just, the houses were quite unique. This particular house, which is at 36th and Lawton, is the house that Oliver built for himself and his family. And at the other end of the block at Kirkham and 36th, this is the house that Arthur Rousseau, the previous owner of Crystal Palace Market, built for him and his family. And then this is where the Emporium put their name on the signage. So you can't miss that. It was now owned by the Emporium, which owned it for almost 20 years. In 1927, the Emporium announced that it was going to vacate its, in about 1930, in 3 years, it would vacate its building on Market near 5th Street and move and build a brand new building near 8th and Market. Now, I assume that means that they were going to discontinue the Market. Their plan for it, which was in the newspaper, is this T shape. And this long part of the T would be an aisle in the department store. It was going to be 234,000 square feet, which was more than twice the size of Crystal Palace Market. And no, this would be the longest aisle in any store or department store in the world. In 1930, in January, they renewed their lease at Fifth and Market, and they renewed it for 30 years. And they didn't announce that until later in the year, that they were not going to be building this huge store that they thought they would build. Now, this is a little thing that I added, you know, kind of for me. The thing encompassed by the yellow is Crystal Palace Market. And it's actually early in its existence because it's before they built the Marion building and the Clarion buildings. But what I wanted to show you was this little thing down here at 8th and Mission. That was a service station, and my grandfather ran that service station during the entire decade of the 30s. So I have a picture of Calvetti's service station. It was right there. And that was my grandfather, Joseph Calvetti. That was him in 1934. So, okay, my family is now, that's the end of my family. I'm going to go back to the inside of all the different things that were there. Here is, again, is the aluminum thing that I showed you earlier. And in back, there's a wholesale fruit company, and you can get cinnamon rolls for 20 cents. It's just is interesting that there was just all this bustle and the differences going on there. One of the things that happened was that banks used to be open on Saturdays the way they are now, and then they announced probably during the Depression that they were going to close on Saturdays. So immediately someone opened up a check cashing booth inside Crystal Palace Market so people could get their checks cashed and buy from the vendors in the market. And this is another view, and what's interesting is that Safeway stores, and Safeway had stores around San Francisco then, but they were small. They were not supermarkets. And they were in Crystal Palace Market as well. What I was going to show you, oh no. First, you have to look at the ashtrays, the very fashionable ashtrays that were for sale. And then this is customers serving choosing a turkey, and there's another one where they have the turkeys hanging. And John Freeman told me a story about his family one year bought a turkey from one of these booths, and on Thanksgiving morning they opened the refrigerator and it smelled so bad that they realized the turkey had gone bad. And somehow they were able to get hold of the owner of that booth by telephone, and the owner brought them another turkey for Thanksgiving. So that was good customer service, I think. Okay, so this is the thing that I was going to show you that didn't work. This was the soda fountain, and it was very large. And this is when it was still probably serving desserts, but it was also serving sandwiches and a few other things. But it obviously didn't make it, because in this picture, it's now a cheese store, and you can recognize the booths. I mean the seats. They're down in the right of this picture, and here they are. Kind of two of them are broken off. And you've got cheese wheels here, and you've got cheese here, and all these signs are about cheese. So if something didn't make it, somebody else moved in. In 1944, well, I'm not there yet. I'm showing you more inside things. We've got more things in bulk and fish and poultry behind it. This is a fish market. And this is the crowd, probably, I think it's the same crowd you saw earlier, but it did have a lot of people there, and fishing supplies. And I like this guy, so I put him in there. Joseph Long Company appliance store. You could go to the Crystal Palace Market and buy an appliance, and I assume have it delivered. You didn't have to take it with you. But Joseph Long is the brother of Thomas Long, and the two of them founded Long's drugstores in the 30s. And so I think that Thomas was more involved, although Joseph was I think he was the president of Long's Drugs. But the other thing that happened was that in 1944, the Emporium sold the Crystal Palace Market to Joseph Long. And so Joseph Long became the owner. Here he is on the right, that's Joseph. On the left is Thomas. And so while their Long's drugstores was growing all over the area and then the country, first store was in Oakland, by the way. The other brother, Joseph, was running Crystal Palace Market. Excuse me. This is a picture of Market Street in 1946. Now, I showed you a picture earlier that was 1921, and a lot of these theaters weren't there. And you can see there's a lot more traffic, a lot more streetcar traffic too. It really became much more, it had moved more toward what they were calling upper market at that time. And then this is in 1950. Which is a clearer photo actually, but it's a good view of Crystal Palace Market, the entrance. This is the Marion building that I told you about, and the two Clarion buildings. And the Orpheum was across the street. But what was happening in the 50s was that a lot of people after the war moved out of San Francisco. They were moving to the suburbs. And when that happened, people stopped going to Crystal Palace Market. It was not the popular place to go. It was no longer as crowded. And they announced that they were going to close. This is a press release that was sent to newspapers. And it reads, this is the interior of the carnival-like Crystal Palace Market in San Francisco, soon to close its doors to make way for luxury motor hotel. The test your blood pressure sign at right marks one of the maze of concessions inside the colorful market. And then you can see that here that there are people, there are customers, but it's not crowded. There aren't a lot of people there. So I think this was in the waning days of Crystal Palace Market. And then this is the closing day. The shelves are pretty empty. And then it looks as if this cash register was being sold for 50 cents, but I don't know if it is, but it was for sale on the last day of business. And some of the vendors and their kids and some of their workers, they had a final drink on the last day and posed for this picture. And this is the day after it closed. So it was gone in August 1, 1959. It closed down, and there was what was built in its place, opened in 1920. Oops, actually, that's an interesting picture because this is the demolition of Crystal Palace Market, and again, you can see that it's right by the Civic Center. But what was being built in its place, the market's place, was Del Webb Townhouse Hotel. And it turns out that Del Webb and Joseph Long had formed some kind of partnership, and they were doing this together. They were working on this together. And it was very big. Here's a postcard of it. It was very large. It didn't do that well. And then they turned it into apartments, and I don't think it did very well there. I think it became kind of seedy after a while, and they have bit by bit torn down the buildings and slowly begun building Trinity Plaza, which is huge, and it'll have hundreds of apartments, and it's supposed to open next year. Just a couple asides about Crystal Palace Market. Author William Saroyan worked there during the Depression when he was a young man. And that's Crystal Palace Market again. But this is a book that came out in 1957. And it's a collection of short stories. And he wrote one called The Play That Got Away. And it talks about his work at Crystal Palace Market, as does part of the introduction to the book. And then another thing that happened was, this is a poem that was published in 1999. I don't know who James Laughlin was. I only know the title is Crystal Palace Market. I haven't figured out how you're supposed to read it, because this is exactly how it was broken up, with the spaces here and here. And you think that, you know, if I go like this, I'm thinking that's right, but then, and then it doesn't seem to work. So I don't know how this poem is read, but this is a poem that acknowledges the existence at one time of the Crystal Palace Market. One of the things that Saroyan said was the whole Crystal Palace Market was a theater, with the audience swarming all over the stage. The play had no stars. Everybody was a star for his moment, and then he was gone with whatever he'd bought. There is no use pretending that people came there for any reason other than to save a little money. At the same time, though, they came for the play, for the comedy, and noise. In 1971, an Examiner columnist bemoaned the fact that there's no Crystal Palace Market or anything like it in San Francisco anymore, and suggested that a new farmers market open in UN Plaza, and that would be right across Market Street from where the Crystal Palace Market entrance was. And that's actually what happened. In 1981, the heart of the city farmers market opened. This market is open Wednesdays and Sundays, and before the pandemic, it was also open on Fridays, but it's not now. And it's a very popular farmers market. So, but some of that came from this market, and this changed the whole area around 8th and Market, made it much, much more popular for a while, a lot more people, a lot of things happening. And before I close, I'd just like to say that if you have any questions, or if you have anybody or you do remember anything about Crystal Palace Market that you can share with me, please send me an email. I should have written it down. It's lorri@sfhistory.org. That's L-O-R-R, 2 R's, L-O-R-R-I-S-F Lorri, L-O-R-R-I @sfhistory.org. Thank you very much. Goodbye.